we're starting a new series here in the book of Ruth, and it's an overlooked book for most men because it's about a woman, and for some reason guys just don't read girly stuff. And it's not very girly, that's the thing. I was processing through with Luigi, what are some things that I can start digging through, because I wanted to move away from thematic that we've been doing for the past few weeks or a few months. And I want to go back to our verse-by-verse study and just digging into the Word again. And he mentioned Ruth, and I'm hoping that, I'm controlling it right here. I'm hoping that we can do this in a way that encumbers a lot of stuff. And we're going to be really looking at Ruth through 4 angles. Today's our introduction. I'm just going to give an overview. Today's more theology. It's more dry. It's less of a sermon and more of teaching. Just so you guys are aware, you're not leaving out of here like, man, he didn't say anything productive. I don't know what to do with my life. That'll come. The next 4 weeks after this week, we're really going to break down how Ruth talks about our identity, how it talks about our actions, how it talks about our theology, what we believe, and how it talks about how we belong and how we belong into a community. And so we're going to break those 4 down, and I'm going to have Josh and Luigi help me out with teaching this so that, we can bring a few different perspectives on things. But Ruth is really interesting. I remember I hadn't touched it for a long time, and I sat down to read it a couple weeks ago, and I've read it a few times since. And the first read through, I just sat down, it's only 4 chapters, and I read through the whole thing, and it just came alive. And it started to make sense, knowing all the different intricacies of theology and the things that we call types or foreshadows or pictures of something else, where you could see Jesus written into the story. And it's a really beautiful picture, and I want us to be able to grasp that in a way that is impactful, it makes sense. And so I'm gonna get into the introduction first, and then we'll read through the book of Ruth. And it's only 4 chapters. Bear with me, but I think it's something we should do to open up this sermon series of really digging into the book. So, the book of Ruth. I need to pull up my notes. I am doing everything on my phone here. So, yes, normally I have my laptop, but the kids needed my laptop this week, so they are using it. We're going to look first at what is the historical cultural context of Ruth, and this is kind of where I get into hermeneutics, the idea of interpreting scripture, where you always start by digging through what the historical context to kind of shape the way that you read the book, because we all bring certain pairs of glasses that we read the Bible through, whether it's our life experiences, the things that we believe, and then we usually interject those things into scripture. We often think of the people the book was written for are just like us. They think the same as us. They live their lives the same as us. When in reality, things are a lot different. Ruth takes place during the days when the judges ruled Israel. And Ruth, the book of Ruth, comes right after the book of Judges. Judges is a time where you had what we consider the dark ages of Israel, where they didn't have a king. They were separate tribes unified through common family, common lineage, but they really did their own things. And there's times where different tribes were getting oppressed by different rulers in the area or different neighbors. And during the time of the Judges, the Philistines start to become a big problem. And we see it spread out throughout the Bible, or the book of Judges, where the Philistines attack the Israelites and they oppress them. And then God raises up a judge like Samson or Deborah, or all these other people who take the opportunity to liberate the Israelites, and they draw the Israelites back to God. And then what happens constantly in the book of Ruth, or the book of Judges, is that sin comes back, it creeps back into Israel, and Israel departs from God. And then God sends the Philistines to punish them, and they oppress them, and they become hard over them, and the Israelites adopt their gods, and then they cry out and say, God, why is this happening? Send someone to save us. So God raises up another judge. And it happens time and time again. And so this is the setting that Ruth takes place. It's during the time of the Judges, the dark ages of Israel. God raises up mighty men and women to lead Israel during its times of great need. And at this time, when Ruth is around, is a time of Israel's great need. We see that there's a famine in Israel. They're not able to grow crops, and we don't know why. There's no explanation in the book as to why there's a famine. It could be that the Philistines salted their fields, or that they just could not get a good harvest because of the weather. We don't know. And ultimately, it's not that important. All we need to know is that there's a famine, and it forces a family to leave their home to find food. And that's the setting that we find ourselves here. This book's most likely written during David's reign. Why do I say that? Because it mentions David at the end of the book. It mentions that Ruth is actually part of the lineage of David. It mentions him, and it also opens up, and we'll see that here in a minute, in a way that causes us to look back into the past, as if a story had happened, not a story was happening. And so the book of Ruth makes us to look back into history, and specifically David's history. Ruth is positioned in Scripture right before the story of Samuel and the story of David that follows his lineage as he becomes king. And ultimately, this book shows us a foreshadow of Jesus and the future redemption that's going to be brought about by a future descendant of Ruth. Not just David, but about a future descendant who's going to be Jesus coming through the line of David. So let's read through it. This is the story. See if it works. Yes, perfect. Told me there was an error. It says in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, "Now it happened in the days when the judges judged that there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the fields of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons." Now, do you see where it's causing us to look back in the past? It says, now it happened in the days when the judges judged. It's opening up by drawing us to look back into the past of Israel, into what had happened before. And it continues, the name of the man was Ahimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, which I didn't practice the name, so spare me as you can. Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. Now they came to the fields of Moab and remained there. Then Ahimelech, Naomi's husband, died. And when she was left with her 2 sons, they took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Ophrah, and the name of the other was Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. So just a little bit about this opening scene in the story. We see that a family is pushed out of Israel in search of food. There's a famine, their crops aren't growing, and as we learn later, this family was a farming family. They had their own land. They could have grown their own crops, but nothing was growing. And so they had to go live somewhere else to try to find food, try to find work. And so they leave their own land and they go to Moab, which is, if we're looking at a map, I should have put a picture up, but I didn't. If we're looking at a map, there's the Red Sea that divides one side of Israel and another side. Moab is on the other side at the bottom of the Red Sea. So they went all the way around the sea down to Moab to find food. And it's there that Naomi's sons married 2 Moabite women who are not Israelite. Usually we see that your Israeliteness comes down from your mother. And so they married 2 Moabites. And it continues here. It says, where? There we go. 5. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the woman was left without her 2 children and her husband. So we see that the story of Naomi is really a little bit about what this story is about Naomi. Starts with her moving her whole family because her husband's looking for fields to plant. Her husband dying, her sons staying with her for 10 years over there, finding wives in the land, and then them dying. And so now she's left without her 2 sons, without her husband, and just by herself with her 2 daughter-in-laws who are not of her people. 2 daughter-in-laws who are of the people of Moab. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law and returned to the fields of Moab. For she had heard in the fields of Moab that Yahweh had visited his people to give them food. So she went forth from that place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way and returned to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-laws, "Go, return each of you to your mother's house. May Yahweh show loving kindness with you, as you have shown with the dead and with me. May Yahweh grant that you find rest, each in the house of her husband." And then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, but we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they might be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is more bitter for me than for you, for the hand of Yahweh has gone forth against me." And they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Ophrah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Then she said, "Behold, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, "Do not press me to forsake you in turning back from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. And your people shall be my people, and your God my God. When you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may Yahweh do to me and more, if anything but death separates me from you." So she saw that she was determined to go with her, and she said no more to her. Then they both went until they came to Bethlehem. Now it happened, when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." And Mara means bitterly, or bitter. And so she says, "Call me bitter, for God has been bitter with me. I went out full, but Yahweh has caused me to return empty. Why do you call me Naomi? Yahweh has answered against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity against me." So Naomi returned, and with her Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the fields of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a mighty man of excellence of the family of Ahimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the fields and glean among the ears after one whom I may find favor in his eyes." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went, and she came, and she gleaned in the fields after the reapers. And it so happened that she came to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Ahimelech. There you go, it's a hard word. Again, this is her father-in-law, the family of her father-in-law. She comes to those fields. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and said to the reapers, "May Yahweh be with you." And they said to him, "May Yahweh bless you." Then Boaz said to his young men, who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" The young man in charge of the reapers replied, "She is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the fields of Moab." And she said, "Please let me glean and gather after the reapers amongst the sheaves." Thus she came and has remained since the morning until now. She has been sitting in the house for a little while. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Have you not heard, my daughter? Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go from this one, but stay here with my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the young men not to touch you. And if you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the young men draw." And she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, though I am a foreigner?" And Boaz replied to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you forsook your father and your mother, and the land of your birth, and came to a people that you did not previously know. May Yahweh fully repay your work, and may your wages be full from Yahweh, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge." Then she said, "May I find favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and indeed have spoken to the heart of your servant woman. though I am not like one of your servant women. And at mealtime Boaz said to her, come here that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. So she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left. Then she rose to glean, and Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even amongst the sheaves, and do not dishonor her. Also, you shall purposefully pull out for her some grain from the bundles, and leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley, about 21 quarts of barley. So she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. And she also took it out and gave Naomi what she had left after she was satisfied. Her mother-in-law then said to her, where did you glean today, and where did you work? May he who took notice of you be blessed. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, the name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed of Yahweh, who has not forsaken his loving kindness to the living and the dead. And Naomi said to her, this man, the man, is our relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers. Then Ruth the Moabitess said, furthermore, he said to me, you shall stay close to my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, so that others do not oppress you in another field. So she stayed close to the young women of Boaz, in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. I want us to take a few things because that really encapsulates the beginning of the story, and I want you to read the rest on your own because it's a lot. But there's a few things that we see in this story so far that are theologically important. We see the idea of loving kindness and the idea of a kinsman redeemer. And I'll get into that here in a minute. I just need to open that up. Boom. Perfect. So Ruth shows how God's people can experience his sovereignty. His wisdom and his covenant kindness is what loving kindness means. If you guys want to read or hear about it a little more, I preached that, maybe mid last year. I'm sure if you dig through our YouTube, you can find it. But I talked about loving kindness and the big idea of what it is and why it's so important to understand it. But this covenant kindness and the sovereignty of God and his wisdom often come in hard circumstances, and we often find that we experience those through the kindness of other people. I think Luigi talked about that a little bit as well, where we experience God's kindness through the kindness of people around us. Kindness, or human kindness, reflects the Lord's kindness towards his people. So when I receive other people's kindness towards me, I'm receiving God's kindness towards me, when done obviously in his name. The story follows how God in his kindness intervenes in the life of Naomi and Ruth. He intervenes to do a few things. One, to preserve their family. These women are considered widows. And if they had no man to take care of them, they had no income. They had no ability to feed themselves. They had no ability to survive. There was laws in Israel that allowed widows and women, orphans, to glean from the fields. What does that mean? That means when the men would go out to harvest their fields, they would cut their sheaths and they would collect it and they would bundle them. And then anything that would fall from that on the ground, they weren't allowed to pick up to put back into the bundle. They had to leave it there so that the people who were misfortunate, the widows, the orphans, could come in and glean the little pieces that were there to be able to eat. God instilled law within Israel that allowed people to be cared for through the very acts of just everyday life, through the accidental dropping of a few pieces of wheat. And what Boaz does for Ruth and for Naomi is he says, intentionally pull pieces out and throw them on the ground so that they have food to eat. So God preserves their family by one, allowing them to have food, but also two, by creating this idea in the Levitical law of kinsman redeemer. that we see brought about here in the book of Ruth. And we'll learn about it a little deeper as we dive through it. But the idea of kinsman redeemer is that it's linked to God's kindness towards widows. When a young woman's husband died, there was this idea in the book of the book of Leviticus where a brother of the dead widow could marry her in order to provide for her an income and a house and place to live. And so this idea of kinsman redeemer is linked to the very heart of this story. It's two big legal practices combined. The first one is property redemption by a near kinsman, where a widow whose husband died and owned property could sell her property to a family member to receive income, to be able to survive. This often happened with really old widows, women who were not of marrying age, who could not bear children. The second is the idea of a levirate marriage, or a childless widow, a young woman who married to a husband. The husband dies, but she never had a son. And so the people of Israel were really big about preserving lineage, about preserving the family. And so if a brother died but had no son to inherit his land, to inherit his property, his family name, then the brother would take his wife and marry her in order to provide for him an heir and to provide a son who would inherit the lands. And so we see that this levirate marriage provides the woman with an heir for everything. And we see that Boaz, being a close relative of Ruth's husband, was able to redeem her family property, meaning that he purchased it for himself, and then he married her. We'll learn that later. He marries her so that she can have an heir to inherit the property. We see that Ruth fathers Obed. Obed fathers Jesse, and Jesse fathers King David. And so King David would not have been around if Boaz never redeemed Ruth in order to redeem her property, purchase it for the family to keep in their name, and ultimately for Obed to receive the property when he became of age, and also for Ruth to have a husband and a child. So we see that there is a foreshadowing of this idea of redemption in this story, where we learn that Christ, or Boaz, becomes a type of Christ, meaning he is a foreshadow or the image of what Christ is going to do in the future, where he becomes a kinsman redeemer, where we are redeemed from something, from death, from sin, from all these other things. And so the two theological implications of this story are God's loving kindness shown through the kindness of others, and then the kinsman redeemer, and where Christ is our redeemer, where he finds us in our most unfortunate situations, where we're separated, fatherless, and he comes in and he brings us into the family, and he redeems us of all the things that we have lost. And so we begin to see that God preserves us in his redemption, just like Boaz preserves Ruth and her family line. He preserves the property by purchasing it. Ruth also becomes a book of answers. And that's really what we're going to begin to dig through during these next 4 weeks. The first one is Ruth answers the question of, who am I? It ties into our identity. Who am I in relation to God? Who am I in relation to Jesus, in relation to the people around us? The second is, what do I do? How do I act? How do I live? And it's a little harder to notice that, but we begin to see a treaty or an act of kindness that we begin to learn to model, where we love one another through our acts and through our kindness. The third one is, what do I believe? This book is rich in theology. It's rich in our understanding of who God is, of what he cares about, how he makes things important in our lives. And lastly is, how do I belong? Ruth is a person who comes, leaves her own people, and joins a new people, and is accepted within the community through her marriage, and also through her honor of her mother-in-law. We see the only reason why Boaz gives her attention is because he says, I've heard all that you have done for your mother-in-law. I've heard how you've shown her kindness, how you've loved her, how you followed her, how you left and forsook your own people, your gods, and you came and made our people and our gods your people and your gods. So we see that Ruth talks about belonging. I want to end it there because I don't want to get too much into what next week and the week after call, but I want us to pray, and then we're going to step into our next form of worship, which is partaking of communion.